Yeah, but I'm sure I'm glad for everyone who's logging on and continues to log on. I'm Dr. Singh Pallet. I'm the president of CMDA, and we are very grateful to have Dr. Michael Viktorov here today with COPIC to talk about Clicktation, explaining your EHR note to a jury. Dr. Viktorov, I'll let you go ahead and introduce yourself, and I know you have control of the slides, so go ahead and take it away.
Okay, good, thanks. My discipline right now is called clinical informatics. We actually have a board certification in that. I used to be a family doctor. I've spent a lot of time working in the area of electronic health information, and my main part of my job, day job, is at COPIC. COPIC's a malpractice insurance company. I'm sure most of you know. We have a risk management department that looks a lot at preventive risk management, and my assignment for COPIC, for the most part, is looking at electronic health information, which is in large part how do you document using these weird EHRs. There's a lot more to it. Obviously, we do cyber risk, and we do texting, email, portals, social media, communications, HIPAA, privacy, all that kind of stuff. But today I want to look specifically at some of the issues involving documenting in settings for you. And I think, with a reasonably small group like this, it's quite reasonable to just kind of carry this on as a dialogue. I have lots and lots of slides that give examples of things and talk about some of the clinical issues. And I can rattle on forever on several subjects, but if you have things that you really want me to hit, I think I can give you permission to just shriek. And then if it gets out of hand, I'm going to have to plow onward. But so you know how we do this. I'm going to turn on the screen sharing. I'm going to show you pictures. Some of these pictures are illustrative. And just to set the stage, I just came out of, just 2 minutes ago, I was in the claims committee where we were looking at lawsuits that we had to make a judgment about, to defend this or pay it. And it is almost every single time, but today was particularly frustrating. There's someone says we wouldn't be in this lawsuit if the documentation were better. And we had at least 7 examples where some doc was getting sued. That we really think that a better conversation between the doctor and the patient and the documenting the shared decision making, that would have probably prevented the misunderstanding that led to a lawsuit. So this is the biggest theme that we have at COPIC. Documentation, that your legal defense is going to depend on how well did you make a note. Very often, it also depends on doing the right thing, but you got to write it down. So looking at some of the really outstanding high points of documentation issues for us in the lawsuit business, the one that is at the top of the list is it's fine for you to say that you thought about A, B, C, D, but the patient in their deposition needs to be able to tell the lawyer, yeah, I heard that. And that's what your defense depends on, that the patient needs to agree, yeah, the doctor did talk to me about all of that. This also pertains to, we talk a lot about informed consent. We're real familiar with that, but there's also informed refusal. And when you make a decision that we're not going to do something, avoid something, skip something, forego something, refuse, decline, all of those decisions not to need the same kind of discussion that the decisions to go to surgery have. Same thing with consultation. You can say, oh, well, I talked to infectious disease, but it's really good if the infectious disease doc's notes agree with yours. One of the things we get in trouble with, some of the big losses that we deal with in the insurance business are neurological injuries. Neuro injury is expensive, and it's devastating and miserable. we don't see usually that the neurologist does a lousy a job of documenting. Usually a neuro exam from a neurologist is pretty good, but where we get nailed is emergency doctor, hospitalist, family doc, consultant, folks like you, long-term care, PT. They need to know how to do a good neuro exam too, because very often when we have neuro findings or something suddenly happens, we all want to look back at the prior exam and say, well, did they have that foot drop last month? And you need to learn, you need to know how to write down more than, mental status, normal, neuro intact. Vital signs. I have a whole bunch of slides about vital signs. I'm going to talk about pain out of proportion. We all know these are red flags. The things that we were taught in medical school jump out at us. So here, I'm not going to spend much time on theory, but this is really the basis for why electronic documentation is difficult. 100 years ago, we sort of learned to do physician notes, and the consumer of the physician note was always the doc writing it, like me, or the next provider in line, you. I'm writing for you. You're my audience. So does it tell you what my thought was, what the plan was, what you should do if I drop dead tomorrow afternoon? Well, that was the initial point, and it still is the initial point of documentation, clinical communication. Unfortunately, the electronic tools we have to do this, the EHRs and other things, were built for and are now designed for, and their primary use is charge capture. They're administrative tools. So I call them cash registers.
I'll tell you afterwards.
That is the reason for the adoption of EHRs. But what that means is that our notes are distorted by all kinds of biases and secondary interests. These aren't evil necessarily, public health, legal defense, productivity management, compliance, all that is ethical and good, but it's not clinical communication. And this creates terrible distortion in our notes. So here, I'm not going to talk much about this, except I love this stuff. I'm going to foreshorten it. Inside the EHR, we've got structured data and unstructured data. Okay, 30 years ago, computers were real stupid, and it was hard to talk to them except in code. So we invented all these code sets, and now a lot of our documentation is checkboxes and encoded data. ICD, CPT, DSM, HCPC. There's a checkbox for everything, and there, obviously there's good and bad about those. So the pro side of structured data, something like a hematocrit or a date, or a weight or a blood pressure, there you can compute it, you can sort it, you can judge it, you can graph it, you can make a cute display, you can exchange it between systems as long as you define it, really good stuff. But the problem is, for most of the really important parts of medical information, it's narrative. I was talking to a guy yesterday who built an artificial intelligence summarization engine. It's really fascinating, up at Columbia Press in New York. And he said, we ignore the structured data because too much of it's wrong and it's hard to interpret. We only go by the doctor's narrative. And that's because of the cons. Rigid vocabulary, off by one click. The choice you want is not available on your list. The choice is prefabricated. The choice is pasted, except it's wrong. So we have the degradation of content in structured data. Well, on the other hand, we got this unstructured data, right? Narrative. Narrative is by far 80% of the lawsuits that we deal with hinge on the narrative, not the structured data, not the clicks and the things we can compute, the things we can't compute. We all speak a language, right? We're fast at it. It's very nuanced. It's full of variety. The EHR has only done one real good thing for us in the last 50 years, and that's that it made that legible. But The cons of narrative are really obvious. Until this decade, it's really been impossible for computers to understand natural language. And now we got systems that understand it better than we do. And you're all reading about large language modules, this AI language generation system, that's going to take over everything. In the next 10 years, you're going to be blinded by what happens. But today still, it's hard to get an analysis done of narrative. So pro, con, pro, con, pro, con. We need both. Ideally, you know, blood pressure and cardiac output would be structured, and the reason for visit would be narrative, and the life would be perfect, you know, but no, life is not necessarily perfect. So I'm going to talk about how life is not perfect. I'm going to skip over, but I have it on the screen here, a bunch of really very specific topics for documentation that are not progress notes. So, you know, be aware that a lot of what I have to say, you know, right now, we can get into these if you want. Right now, I'm going to start with the progress note as the emblem of documentation. But as you can see, there are other things that you may end up needing to document that have very different guidelines. And I'm going to start, since you guys are in long-term care, I'm going to start with a document that these folks at AHIMA have put out. This is an organization that for, I guess, 30 years has only looked at healthcare, medical record management, information management. These are really tremendously helpful, folks, and they have guidelines. And here's a guideline. I sent this to Dr. Platt. Some things, pointers and tips for you. But here, let's take into I'm going to look at the pain scale for lawyers, right? These are our lawyers. There's a happy scale. These are the things that they like, and they're self-evident. You all know this. You could give this lecture yourself. You know, what makes your document good? You know, back at the unhappy scale, the things that hurt our lawyers and make them cry are these things. And you probably could come up with all of these yourselves. The main one that destroys us in court is a discordance. It's when one part of the note doesn't support the other part of the note, and the jury is left with the question, don't you guys talk? But obviously, gaps, omissions, contradictions, and I'm going to talk about clickiness in a minute. I have some examples. But just let's take the basic format. I assume everybody here, whatever your specialty, you have gone to a school where they taught you about SOAP, right? The old Larry Weed problem-oriented record. And so let's use that as a paradigm to start with, okay? What goes wrong with the subjective? Obviously, the thing the subjective is supposed to do is tell why is the patient here? What do we hope to do here? What do we mean to accomplish? And it's amazing how often we can read a note and sometimes not even figure out, like, what did the patient think you were doing? So make sure that you're in agreement with the reason for visit. We all know about significant positives and negative. That's all great. But let me talk at the bigger picture about the narrative subjective. This is where the story comes. And here I have, you can see this is a progress note I wrote 200 years ago about a typical family practice case. You've all seen this patient, real common. It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. La, 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 on we go. This is a natural language account of something. And absolutely, this is what the jury wants to see if something ever goes wrong. But over on the left, you see what the programmer has given me to work with, right? These are my checkboxes for today. Some kind of templated history taking that actually degrades the content of the information so badly that you can't even figure out what happened when you review the checkboxes. And particularly in nursing documentation, this is a tremendous vice that impairs our ability to understand Well, what went on? You know, checkboxes at one point were designed for efficiency. But now we have so many checkboxes that in fact they slow us down. So this is the pun that I make in the beginning about clicktation, right? We're generating a lot of notes by clicking on stuff. You know, it applies to drop downs, pick lists, that sort of thing, fill in the blanks. But these things are lethal in court if you make a mistake. Sometimes they're ambiguous. Sometimes we have double negatives and triple negatives and positive negatives and badly phrased, contradictory, difficult to understand, vague. Is that what you really meant? Why didn't it ask this? So you need to look at your templates very closely and figure out how they look when they're populated, because think about a jury of lay people trying to evaluate a catastrophe 2 years later. Here, I'll give you a couple of examples. I got, you know, some show and tell. This is an absolute exact screenshot. I cut out all of the HIPAA stuff, but this is exactly what this record looked like. We were trying to defend this in a lawsuit. And this was it. This is the 100%. The next thing after this is the exam. So what do you say to this when the person, you know, these are always compartment syndrome or a vascular compromise or, you know, a fracture that was missed, or, you know, something's wrong with this person, swelling in pain somewhere, you know, of what? Of the brain, of the tongue? And this, even if you go down somewhere later and start talking in more detail, it makes the jury think you're just not careful. So objective, right? We know that's the exam part, right? And the lab, it's always the lab. You know the issues about documenting the important positives and negatives, and I can't go on too much about the neuro exam, the peripheral exam. We had a horrible case this morning about a decubitus, and you know, nobody flipped the patient over, you know, for like a week. There's the missing thing is, well, what did his sacrum look like before he went into septic shock? Those are some of the questions the jury has. And of all the objective things I really want to hit, you know, in a long-term care facility, it's not always the vital signs, but in almost every acute environment, we get tripped up by vital signs that are disregarded, not responded to. And one of the things you know, you guys do transfers sometimes. I should point out something we learned from a plaintiff's attorney, you know, actually a plaintiff's attorney's expert. If there is tachycardia, you know, when they're leaving your facility, or for heaven's sakes, when they're entering your facility, in some cases, there's a 20% chance that they're in trouble already. That patient who comes in with 118 pulse, you know, low-grade fever, you really need to take that seriously, because 70% of the time they're already septic at that moment. And we see discharges from time to time. The ones that come back really bad, often it's sepsis. Sometimes it's a stroke, you know, respiratory distress, bowel perforation. And tachypnea also. You don't deal very much with children, I suspect, in your business, but in pediatrics, tachypnea is half of the exam. So here, look, this is a pain point for objective. We got a physical exam that has the irritating cliches that a lot of these begin with: well-developed, well-nourished, no acute distress. Why are you telling me that? That's just silly. But now we have a large hematoma on leg. That's nice. Would it help to know which one? And then you know that the people that are going to get in trouble with the hematoma on their leg are all going to die of a pulmonary embolus, or they're going to be septic, or they have, you know, an orthopedic problem that's really bad, or what, a wound, or this is vascular compromise. So give me something here. let your lawyer give him some help to know, was there a pulse? Was the leg warm or cold? Besides hematoma, was it painful? And so on. This is child's play. So now, assessment. This is the part that the lawyer goes to first in the medical record. This explains why it was okay for you to have missed whatever it is that happened. The reason it's okay is because you thought about it and you discussed it with the patient. That's what the assessment is for, is right or wrong. This is where the two of us agree we're headed right now. A lot of times in a long-term care environment, a patient is not in a good condition to have a shared decision-making conversation. But somebody needs to. The person that's going to sue you should be the one that you have the shared decision-making with. So here, this is designed for emergency rooms, but it may apply also in your environment. Here we see a fantastically complicated, interesting differential diagnosis with all sorts of stuff in it. The diagnosis is headache, and let me confess, it's real irritating for me to see stuff like R51, because I can't use R51 in any way. I don't care if it's an R51. That's a billing thing. It's just clutter in my mind. But here, this doc tried to defend himself by saying, look, I thought of everything in the world, including malaria. What the plaintiff's attorney does with this is immediately turns it around to make you look dumb and ask the question, okay, so malaria, you say, where's the peripheral smear for parasites? Because that's how you diagnose malaria. TMJ syndrome, fantastic. There's a very specific exam you do to rule in or out TMJ syndrome. HIV, oh good, there's lab for that. Let me look for it. We have so many cases where they ruled out meningitis, but there was no spinal tap. And in this case, this was actual, this is a real screenshot. This was a thrombotic stroke where the doc's differential said, oh yeah, it could be thrombotic, but there wasn't anything done. There was no imaging. And the neuro exam was terrible. So writing a big, long differential does not protect you. In fact, it's an invitation to the plaintiff's expert to ask you, yeah, how did you assess all those? So here's another thing. This is what I call discordance, okay? This is not subtle. We have a pretty decent thyroid exam. It's normal. That's nice. And it kind of describes normal stuff, which we really like. But then down at the assessment, it turns out that we billed somebody for a thyroid mass. This is this is ugly looking, okay? You just said there's no thyroid mass, and now you're billing for a thyroid mass. So what's going on here? It could be conceivable. You can make up a scenario in which the patient came in asking if they have a lump, and you say, I don't feel it, and you bill for looking for a lump. Yeah, that's nothing fraudulent there. But on the face of what we see now, you billed for a thyroid mass that didn't exist. That invites a question about fraud. Either you're incompetent or you're dishonest. And you never want to be in that choice. That, heads, tails, you lose both ways. Okay, so finally, plan. The plan, of course, is everything after you made your assessment. And part of the plan, again, is, yes, and I talked to the patient about this and they understood it pretty well, and the daughter-in-law thought it was a swell idea. That really helps if we can see that in your documentation. How does it follow from the discussion of risks and the disclosure of procedures that you did with the patient? So here, again, I don't know how relevant this all is to long-term care, but you do some preventive medicine once in a while because you see people long-term. This is a redacted note of maybe the most common failure of follow-up that we get in the lawsuit business. So here we see a patient was scheduled for an X-ray and they didn't go. they called, they said, I don't feel good, canceled that, and so the nurse in the documentation process canceled the procedure. Okay, no problem. This happens all the time. I don't know what it was. Colonoscopy, breast biopsy, whatever, hemoglobin A1C. I don't care, because we failed to follow up all kinds of plans. But in this case, the reason we got a lawsuit was because the nurse didn't enter a new plan, substitute the appointment with a rescheduled appointment. Instead, in this case, they just put down done. And of course, whenever this happens, Murphy is in charge of all these things. The patient came back, some time later with a cancer that could have been less severe, right? Theoretically, the plaintiff will say, this wouldn't have been staged this well if only you had done the test that we were supposed to have. And how are we supposed to know that it was important? So there's a whole paperwork agenda thing that we talk about under the rubric I call task-oriented medicine, which has to do with how do you manage necessary follow-ups and the receipt and review of test results when they come in for you. Okay, now we'll get into some specific problems in documentation. And again, you guys can yell if some of these trigger thoughts in your mind or examples that you've dealt with. I just want to deal with the alteration thing, because this is one of the legal questions that we get on the phone pretty often. In the old days of paper charts, we could do an alteration real easy. You draw a line through it and you write the right thing, and you don't destroy the wrong thing, but you make it clear that that's the wrong thing. I wrote down sulfa, but the patient called me 2 weeks later and said, oh, that's not true, that it's penicillin, you got to fix that. And of course, I just go and fix it. That's it. The standard of practice is you make your note as good as you can. But in EHRs, there's this really malignant kind of technology that lawyers have asked for, which is called record locking. And a lot of times after you've closed the note, you can no longer fix it, no matter how bad it is. I have dictated an op note on entirely the wrong chart. Who hasn't done that? But sometimes in electronic record, it's really difficult to erase and destroy. Of course, that leaves footprints, but you don't want to have the wrong stuff inside the wrong person's chart. And this is technically sometimes tricky. It's one of the skills you got to work out with your technology people. How do we fix stuff so that it's clear to the next provider in line? What do they really mean by this? And of course, in EHRs, very often it means creating a brand new note that's an addendum to the old note. But then where is that? It could be 2 weeks later. Does it even look like it's in order? And is the bad note still saying the bad thing? Like, what if I rely on it? So we got to clean up notes that need to be corrected. These correction rules are really important now, but we've got open records law. The information blocking rules in HIPAA have been in place almost 2 years. The issue now is a lot of people are calling and finding things in their notes that they don't like. And there's rules, there tricky legal rules for not how you do it when you agree, that's easy, just do it. But how you don't do it when you disagree. And that's something you need to call us about. So as part of your documentation package, I just want to point out that you are aware, you should be aware, there's a ton of stuff that's going to be subpoenaed in your trial that is not your SOAP note. Your appointment schedule, we will absolutely look at that. The nurse's note, admission discharge summaries, result tracking log. When did you get the result of that positive stool blood test? Phone records, yes, we will subpoena your phone. We'll go to Verizon and Sprint and AT&T. We'll find out what time did you make that phone call to the pharmacy. We'll look at their phone and see if that time matches yours. All kinds of billing records get in court, no-show records, all sorts of things, and the interviews of the people that you work with. But in particular, I just want to make you really aware your EHR, your electronic system, is absolutely making a hidden secret log that timestamps every interaction you have with it. Everything you type, backspace, change, alter, add, subtract, copy, paste, print, forward, email. We even know when you open the chart and look at it and how many seconds you were in the note that you read. And we always get the metadata audit log as part of the court proceedings, and it's a big part of your deposition. So you will be asked something like, we've had this a lot of times, why did you spend so much time looking at page 13 of the previous discharge summary? What was on that page that was so amazing for you? But we had an orthopedist that did something, and they're getting sued, and the plaintiff's attorney said, well, tell me, how long did you really look at that x-ray? And the orthopedist said, well, I don't know, maybe a minute or two, which is a really bad deposition answer. Don't do that. But then the plaintiff's attorney whips out the metadata and says, well, actually, it was 8 seconds. You looked at that image for exactly 8 seconds. Ladies and gentlemen, a minute or two. What a liar. What else is this person lying about? So you impeach your testimony because they actually know how long you spent on everything, if it's important. Which brings us to the discovery of the electronic evidence. We're not just going to be looking at your notes. I had a family doc that called me one time. They're getting sued, and they said, well, I printed out the note, but the attorney rejected it. They said, we don't want a printout. You can Photoshop a printout. We want your hard drive. And we're 2 guys with a card are coming on Monday, and they're going to take your server, and that's it. So yes, if you are in trouble with the FBI or Homeland Security or the fraud people, that is what they're going to do. They're going to take your computer, your device. Well, in this case, though, we went to the judge and we said, oh, Your Honor, wait, we can't operate without our computer. How about if we make you a forensically certified copy? And then you give it to the attorney and their expert. Knock yourself out, metadata, everything, go for it. But in that case, what we said to the judge was, they have a subpoena for one record. There's 20,000 charts on that hard drive. They can't just be wandering around in there. That violates HIPAA and all sorts of things. So now they got to go into the judge's chamber with our forensic expert and their forensic expert. What I'm saying here is expenses. This is part of the cost of defending you. It requires a lot of expertise that we didn't used to have when we just needed to find some genius that could read your horrible handwriting. So yes, backup tapes, laptops, your spouse's laptop. You ever get into the computer on vacation? Who had the laptop? Your kid's Facebook page. Absolutely. We had a case where the mom and dad doctors went home. They're talking about the horror case of the day, and for some reason there are children at the table, and they run right upstairs and put the whole thing on Facebook, which now they're felons. It's a HIPAA violation. Everybody goes to jail. So yeah, social media, that's another whole issue for us. We will be getting your emails. We're going to get your text messages. We'll get the text messages from your phone and your staff's text messages and your receptionist's Facebook page, and all of that kind of stuff can end up being things you talk about in court. Okay, so if there's any nurses in the audience or people that have ever worked with a nurse, I want to go to this myth. I got a dozen myths, but I'm just going to do one of these here. This is this myth of they're going to ask you in your deposition. So tell me, you've been in healthcare for 9 years. Have you ever heard the expression, if it wasn't documented, it didn't happen? And sorry, if any of you have never heard that, now you have, so too bad. You got confess. But yeah, you've all heard it. But that what they're doing, obviously, in the deposition is they're trying to put you in an awkward spot, because they wouldn't ask you that if there was something in the record. It's something not in the record. So we'll tell you in your depot prep, there's an answer to that, and it's a little tricky. The first thing you say is, yes, counselor, I've heard that expression, but it's a heuristic for beginning nursing students. It's an exhortation to document completely. There is nothing real about it, nothing true about it. It's not a guideline or a standard. And there's a ton of incredibly vital, important stuff that we do here every day that we don't document. So I'll give you an example. My medical assistant always wipes the arm with an alcohol sponge before they give a flu shot. They always do that. It doesn't do anything. It's purely ceremonial. There's no infectious disease purpose behind that. It's not evidence-based, but we always do it. People expect it, but we never document it. There's no flu shot record that says, oh yeah, sponge wipe. But ask anyone here. It's part of our normal habit and routine. We always do it. Anyone will tell you. We have the patient take their shoes off when they get on a scale. We don't have a checkbox for shoes. Come on. I always explain to people the risks of bleeding to death when I put them on anticoagulants. Every time. Ask my assistant. It's a part of my routine. I would never have omitted that. Now, actually, that's one you should probably put in the record, because anticoagulants are horrible. But your explanation for something not being in the record, you hear how long this takes? This is tedious, but it's something you need to understand about not documented, not done. Okay, and I don't want to spend any time here on not documented, period, because yeah, we all have trouble finishing our notes. One of the most burdensome problems we have in life now is writing our stupid notes. It's a burnout issue, but we've got to do it. The problem is some of our technology for doing it is really tedious and annoying and very burdensome and irritating. Doesn't matter. That when we get a case without notes being finished, or where the metadata says the note about this patient's fall and head injury came 10 days after the actual incident, then we get a problem. Because you can see every minute that your note is delayed, you know what the implication is. You already knew the outcome. You're biased. You had information that you shouldn't have had access to. Your note, we can't trust it. So look, we know stuff happens in healthcare. You can't always do a contemporaneous note, but you're going to need to document late notes and explain why it was late and describe the context. And don't pretend that you don't know what happened in the interval. Your note has to be comprehensive and transparent. Yeah, and of course, there's perennial offenders about late noting. I'm not going to deal with that. This is a human resources and peer-to-peer issue. We can give you guidelines. Okay, so I'm going to mention now some sympathy spots, but we'll move on. I'll talk a little bit about some real direct examples of things that you could be doing when you're looking over the quality of your own and each other's documentation. That's kind of where I'm heading, is read this stuff critically. Well, one of the worst things that we have to deal with in healthcare, no matter what our discipline, is what I call the inbox problem. We have now a flood of incoming information to us. It's not all email, but what I mean as an analogy is phone calls, EHR prompts, reminders, things on your calendar, people pulling on your sleeve and saying, could you just come and look at this? All of this input stuff now has completely exceeded any human being's ability to manage it. We can't. We've already created technology that can give us an amount of work to do in the day that we can't do. This is a burnout issue. But it's a theoretical and philosophical problem for us. So right now, we don't have an artificial intelligence that can read our agenda for today and tell us what's really important. It can't read all of the incoming lab and pick out the ones that you can ignore, which is, most of it. This is a dilemma for today. I don't have a solution for this, but you need to at least be able to answer the lawyer who says, well, don't you guys ever have a talk about this? Like, do you compare notes? How do you deal with it? Do you have some policies? You have processes? Or is everyone on their own to make up their own solution? Another issue we get into with electronics, and I know you have this because I've seen, nursing home notes. This is an absolutely accurate, I fictionalized this by monkeying with the names, but this is exactly how it looks on the screen. In the case of a patient, we had fall on the floor with anaphylactic reaction. And the patient is not breathing. The nurse ran in, immediately went to the EHR to see if there was any clue that would help. Came across this thing, which at the top says allergy list. Oh, good, that might help. And then is completely befuddled by the nonsense on the screen. This is a failure of user interface. It's not a usable screen. You can't interact with this. I defy you in 2 seconds with the patient choking to tell me what they're allergic to. There's all kinds of silly things on this. I'm not going to go into it too much. This is what I call clutter. No one needs to know the middle initial of the nurse and the highly uncomfortable footnote. And what is this even? I don't want to know that. I just want to know meperidine does something. Yes, details I can expand. But in an emergency, this is not helpful. It's the opposite of helpful. It's taking time away from screaming out the hall epinephrine. So I'm going to skip over this. I don't know how much telehealth you folks do, but we get a lot of it now. It's a growing thing. We love it. But documenting a telemedical encounter is very tricky, and there's some special rules for it. On your end, what I would expect is that some of you are using remote consultants. Certainly in rural facilities, we've got fabulous access to the world's best providers, consultants, but they're going to be talking to you electronically. And there are responsibilities on both ends for how you document electronic consults. We can go into that some other day. And, then talking about consults, curbsides, right? We all do informal consults. I mean, if you're lucky enough to have peers that you're working alongside. Whoop, something? No, anaphylaxis. Okay, the best consultants, I will tell you, keep a little diary. They have a notebook of when you called them, what you asked, who it was about, what you said, and what they told you. So you know that if you call infectious disease or neurology or psychiatry, if those providers know what they're doing, they kept a note with a date and a time of when they talked to you, because when you all get sued, they have to go to court and remember that. What that means is you better be keeping a note too. And it's really great if your note agrees with your consultant's note. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about the assembly of the record. Those of you that do clicks and drop downs. Here is an emergency room note. It could be yours. I always know the outcome, right? I work for the malpractice company, so I always know what happened. This was a woman who tripped and busted her foot, and she got a midfoot fracture that was neglected, and she went for a long time, got a malunion, non-union, fusion, limp. She was disabled, and we really should have caught this. I mean, this was our fault. We paid money on this one. But here, look at this note. There's something wrong with it from the very start. Patient presents for evaluation of pain, for evaluation of swelling, for evaluation of tenderness. History provided by patient. history provided by patient's spouse. This is not human language. This is refrigerator magnet ransom note poetry. This is pseudo text assembled by drop-down click boxes. And I'll show you where we got killed. The pain is associated with no associated inability to ambulate. Whoa, how many negatives can you put? This should be a contest. What does that phrase even mean? Well, it means they walk fine. But look down below. They can't bear weight on their foot. Oh, okay. So they walk fine as long as they don't touch down with their foot. When the jury looks at this, they're going to say, what kind of a fool wrote this? This is not a careful exam. I don't even know what this is. This makes me look like we have a careless provider here who isn't attending what the patient's disease was. And of course, this is 3 years later, they got a busted foot, which you missed. The reason you missed it is because you have this kind of a note. This case even goes farther. This is fantastic. This is the family doctor on Monday. The ED sent this patient home, walking on their busted foot. Then this is a template, a marvelous, excellent, thorough foot and ankle exam, better than anything I ever used to do in practice. And they missed the busted foot. So it's a great template, but it won't help you if you don't actually do the exam. The one thing that this is my instrument for detecting broken feet, okay? I point this at the sore spot and I stick it on the foot and the patient says, ow. And then I x-ray that. So I don't need, what template? We don't need no stinking template. Well, we love templates, but they can misfire. Here's something that will catch you and it's not your fault, but the jury's going to blame you. And this is internal discordance inside of a consultant's report. This is an actual x-ray report that we got in trouble from. At the top, it's a normal CT. At the bottom, down in the body of the radiology interpretation, it's an obstructed bowel. Normal CT. Oh, I could easily sign my initials to that. I didn't read it. I'm not explaining to you how you avoid ever doing this. I'm simply telling you that when this happens, you're going to look really bad. And you're going to have to say, I don't really have an excuse. The world moves too fast for me to be able to do this kind of proofreading because I'm overworked. But that doesn't console the patient, who is now dead. Okay, so you know all about these macros, these little parts of speech that we use to keep from thinking. And we all know the little the limericks and haikus that fill in for automatic speech. But when you put those kind of things, neuro intact, when you put that into the printing press of these EHRs, there will always be that case where your documentation is wrong. It's just simply inaccurate. It doesn't match the facts. The patient will tell you, they never took my socks off. So how do we do color, motion, sensation intact? And when those kinds of discordances show up in court, you look careless. Okay, I want to particularly nail a way to make you look bad, and that is this copy-paste procedure that a lot of EHRs allow. I was actually on this task force that was at ECRI now 6 or 7 years ago. The Joint Commission asked us if we would write a guideline about copy and paste that made it illegal. Where they were headed was, we want to outlaw copy and paste as a function inside a medical EHR. It's just too dangerous. And you know the reason it's dangerous. But the outcome of this study, we had, there were 20 people on this task force, very smart, and I was there too. What we told the Joint Commission was, no, copy and paste is very valuable sometimes. It's like anesthesia. It's useful and it's dangerous. You need to use it judiciously, but you don't want me retyping the cardiac output report, from a cardiac cath. You don't want me explaining what the radiologist said or the EEG report. You want to picture that. I mean, yes, it's a computer. Let's use copy and paste when it's important. But the way we get nailed with copy paste is when it's abused. You can't do this. This is an actual case from my own practice. Okay, I sent my patient with cancer to a really good cancer doctor, and every week this doc sent me a beautifully articulated note summarizing the last visit, and every single note began with a sentence: your patient is here today for his 3rd course of chemotherapy. Now, the patient did well. They were happy. I was happy. But if anything went wrong in that case, we would never have been able to take those notes to trial because they're not credible. They make you look like you're a criminal. Okay, I already talked about templates and forms. We love forms, but you have to treat them the same way you treat copy paste. It's a powerful, potentially dangerous tool. We had a baby die one time of meningitis. Again, I always know how they come out. So this baby died of meningitis, and they were seen by a board-certified emergency and pediatrics doc, dual boarded. This doc could have given you an hour-long lecture on sepsis workup in a newborn. But when the kid came into the ED, the nurse pulled out the nausea and vomiting template instead of the fever in a newborn template. And you know where it heads. This really, really good doc just got blinkered, followed the pathway of the template, didn't think of the thing they absolutely knew, which was, yeah, they need a spinal tap. And nature took its course. So yes, please have wonderful templates. We love prompts and reminders and checklists. This is Atul Gawande's whole message. But respect the way they can go wrong. This is just a joke. Actually, it's a real case we had, but we never went to court with this medical record because it's ridiculous on its face. We got basically an autopsy of the patient that this provider wrote down, time spent with patient 5 minutes. Great. This, you can't read this, maybe it's small on the screen, but this provider did Tanner staging on adults. How many of you do Tanner staging on your patients? No need to raise your hand. What are they even doing here? This is absurd. But the real problem in this was that they never did that exam. It was fraudulent. Well, what the plaintiff's attorney would have done to us in court would have said, why does your exam not match any of the things in the patient's report? And the answer is because I didn't do them. I just faked it. We bought a machine that generates false notes so that we can send them in and get paid. When they come up with that, your office manager says, yeah, we love this. Look at our revenue. Then the plaintiff's attorney is going to say, your false notes are not medical malpractice. They are criminal. Dr. Platt, you got a question?
Oh, there is a question in the chat box, but I wanted to let you know there are about 5 minutes left.
Oh, yeah, right. We'll zoom now. And Ellen, wait a minute. Should I look at the chat box? Maybe I should take a look at that.
Do you want it now or?
Yeah, no, tell me now. We can.
Yeah.
We have a few more things, but they're all fun. Let's go. Answer real quick.
Oh, Dr. Jackson is asking, can you comment on best practice for time to close a note? 24 to 48 hours or 72?
Yeah. There is no standard, but what it is you're turning over an hourglass. Every minute, I'm not exaggerating, every minute that the note goes without being concluded is a chance for some interrupting event to occur. the patient will fall, the patient will cough, the patient will have a stroke. That's, in a way, that's life. That happens. You will not be held in any court to a standard of minutes, hours, or days. But what will happen is that the longer it goes, the more it's an opportunity for a plaintiff's attorney to accuse you of being slow, negligent, overworked, busy, lazy. They'll call you names like that. And so what we suggest is that you have a policy in your organization that says, we are going to make a diligent professional effort to complete our records within blah time, whatever you all agree on, makes sense. And you're also going to understand as peers that it can't possibly be 100%. When you do make a late entry, you just have to describe what it was, why it was. I will just tell you that the one time that you can't do that, it's just too late, you have to call us, is if you receive a summons or a subpoena or a notice of a claim before the note is closed. If that's the case, now don't go correcting it. You need lawyer advice. Okay, let me skip forward. I got a couple at the end here that are kind of cute. Keep thinking of your questions. This is just a note about signal and noise, signal and noise, signal and noise, right? EHRs, we hate them. They're really hard to interpret. Here, signal, this is like a pretend note I wrote. Noise, this is a pretend epic note I wrote. Same data. Your Honor, why am I missing the crucial thing? Yeah, lucency head of humerus. I don't know how I could have missed it. Inbox problem, right? We already discussed that. Problem lists. Oh my God, real pain point for me. I get migraine when I look at these lists. I was a neighbor of Larry Weed growing up in Cleveland in the 1960s when he invented the problem-oriented record. He turns over in his grave when he sees this. This is not the organizing principle of a good medical record. This is a cash register tape of diagnoses thrown in for billing purposes. And not only does it not have any part in your clinical evaluation, it is misleading. It's inaccurate, duplicative, probably disputable. So this is a shame. We could have decent problem lists, but we don't. Here's a case of a problem list that went horribly wrong. At the top of the problem list, this patient is on anticoagulants. So how could he die of a PE with that history? Well, the answer is no one reconciled it with his med list. Reconciliation. This guy, let me just skip forward. Reconciling these various lists is an incredibly important part of the non-face-to-face care that you have to do. And it's more and more critical depending on your inbox. You have to look at the diagnoses, see if they match the meds. You have to look at the meds and see how they match the allergies. You got to look at the advanced directives and see if they match your plans. On and on and on we go. This is chart work. But when we get sued, very often we look like we're sloppy because we didn't do it. Okay, so here, a few more lists and I'll be done. There are some specific ways that you could document discussion of risks. Was the family told, we do everything we can to avoid falls here because it's the #1 major thing that you risk and we can't prevent them all, but look at all the stuff we do. Pressure ulcers. We hate those. We do everything not to have them. But wait, despite that, here is a brochure. You should read about that. There is a disclosure that goes with, even being pregnant. There's a disclosure with having a vascular disease, or, there's a disclosure with anybody that you put on some of these drugs that call Steven Johnson syndrome. The patient so often goes to the lawyer because, well, I don't remember hearing that. But that's a big part of our job. Internal communications, that's the notes we tell each other about patients who have specific risks. Oh yeah, here's a note about the dragon. I love the dragon. There's whole websites you go to, to see jokes about the dragon. If you use the dragon, call me. We'll have a fun talk. But we have had lawsuits where the dragon tripped us up. Okay, so I'm going to finish. Got 60 seconds left. This is the hard question that we're going to face with a jury. They don't believe you don't proofread your notes. They don't believe that it's impossible for anyone to proofread their own work product. They can't understand why you made an error. You know, aren't you a professional? Didn't you go to 25 years of school? And frankly, we don't have a good talking point for that. It's true. We can't. All we can say is we really, really do our best. We try not to type notes in the wrong chart. You know, almost never happens, but you know, it's because we're careful. But yeah, still, sometimes it happens. You know, that's why we have layers of protection. And one of the main layers of protection is that we audit each other's notes. We talk to each other. We have meetings about this. We have consensus about how we document or don't document certain things. We criticize the stuff that goes into our portal. We criticize our own op notes. We look at the way we do standard exams and see how much consistency there is from provider to provider. Yes, please do this. And 2 more slides, I'm done. This is a body cam. It's what the police have. It's what we're all going to be using for documentation sometime coming up. You know why. This is an exam room with the same thing. Ultra high resolution camera, microphones. It's creating an actual permanent video record of everything we did. There's nothing in the room here to type on. There's no screen. There's no nothing. You're just speaking out loud to the artificial intelligence that is your scribe, keeping the notes. This is for sale now. Microsoft and Nuance offer this for you to buy in your examining rooms. Okay, that's my contact info. I'm sorry, I meant to leave more time, but I'm going to stop sharing and look at the chat. Okay.
Are there any questions from people? You can go ahead and use your microphone. Thank you so much. I was wondering, Dr. Viktorov, you said that you've given this talk many times. What kind of positive changes have you seen the providers or groups make as a result from learning this?
Oh, wow, good one. Yeah, you know, I think maybe calling attention to the need for conversation around it. There's one more thing you have to do on your spare time, right? Mm-hmm. But we have seen tremendously good documentation policies and practices. You know, they're different. You need them both. Come out of provider organizations where there was good collegial discussion about it. Simply knowing that this can trip us up. And then, you know, it's kind of like saying that, does our sterilizer really have the right temperature? Are our sharps boxes secure? Do we have a fire alarm? You know, this is part of the safety audit that you do of your institution, and everybody gets to play, right? All the people that come near the note get a chance to have input on, do we like the way this is working? Well, that's a stupid thing. No, they don't like it, but at least they can say, can we make this go for us?
Are there things that we should be asking our EMR companies to do differently, or they're all cumbersome? They all set us up for all these pitfalls.
Yeah, they do. Unfortunately, the EHR vendor is an 800-pound gorilla. It is very, very hard to get them to listen to you. You know, COPIC has trouble getting anyone to listen to us. The Medicare, the government can't get them to listen. These systems are absolutely designed, built for, bought by, and used for the service of revenue. There are clever uses that we've been able to build in. You know, there's some really good stuff in some EHRs. There are prompts and reminders and decision support and you know, drug interactions. You know, I wouldn't want to do without them. We've never found any of the residents coming out of training who said, I'm going to go to a paper practice. That never happens. But right now we're in a very awkward adolescence of electronic information. And there's a lot of stuff that's cranky. and really it doesn't serve our purposes. So, well, my job so far is to kind of call your attention to it and have you work around it. It's kind of like being in a rural hospital without an MRI. Yeah, wish you had one, but you need to build for what you've got. Well, we're here.
Well, thank
Okay.
you.
I'm just giving you a tour of some of the things that we can help with if they come up.
Appreciate it. Thanks for taking the time to do this presentation. And thank you all for joining and taking the time out of your busy practice to learn something new. Appreciate it. And if you need COPIC points, go ahead and reach out to COPIC. Thank you so much, everybody.